Alrighty, good morning, everyone. This is a little supplementary IPython Dev meeting that we're having to try to sort out um, our documentation setup as we move through the repo breakup and decide on tool chains and how do we do it, and the fact that we have various languages. So, yeah, it's interesting that we're looking at this because in Kbase we have a very similar problem in the sense that it's a project that also has multiple repos and they themselves have multiple languages. And so, yeah, what should we do? We had a few conversations about this back when, but we never came to a complete conclusion, and now probably we need to.
Yeah. So I think it'll help our discussion to list our repos under the two orgs that are relevant in this. If people can help me, I can't keep track of them all.
Yeah. Well, we might be able to use there's some stuff below in requirements that we could perhaps use. There's a little embed iframe. So, I'm going to paste that stuff here to see if we're missing something. So genutils, we said we were not going to even document.
Yep.
Traitlets is already there. Core is already listed. NB format's already listed. Client's already listed. Main IPython's already listed. Kernel's already listed. NB convert's already listed. Notebook's already listed. Parallel. Okay, so I don't think we're missing a lot.
NB grader, I guess it's a separate project, but do we want to list it still?
NB grader. I mean, technically, NB viewer is named NB viewer, right? Still.
Yes. Don't we have the two? NB viewer is old repo and.
We have both, you mean?
I don't know. No, we just have NB viewer. Sorry, my bad.
Okay. So NB viewer. These are the ones that are kind of called.
Oh no, it's NB convert. We have two. I think we used to have the old one.
Okay.
So Matthias, have you been trying out Gitbook?
Yes, it's still a bit clunky in some edges. It's hard to set up. I'm not sure how easy it is to collaborate. I've done that with Thomas, but it's still a bit clunky. But the nice thing is you directly get in-browser editor, and you can just write Markdown. And when you click Save, it automatically compiles and is published as HTML. The theme is pretty nice. I mean, you've seen the. I can pass the link somewhere.
I just put the link there.
Okay, sorry.
Well, to Gitbook, I did. You may have a different link.
No. I can invite.
You mean
I can send you the link to what I have written.
Ah, that would be wonderful. I mean, part of what's interesting about it is it's Markdown based, and there's they have a plugin architecture, and so
you can install it locally also if you want.
Okay.
And the other thing I just saw 2 days ago is that Read the Doc now also have Markdown.
Mm-hmm.
You can write your docs in the docs folder of a project as Markdown, and it will be rendered exactly as the same themes on Read the Doc or as anything else.
Gosh, and that's really cool. I mean, converting notebooks to Markdown would be almost a no-op. I mean, not quite, but it's well, I guess if there's equations that complicates it, but
yeah. But I think it's fine because if you have equation and it's just dollar something dollar, then you inject Matjax into the page. When the page loads and you have a marked Matjax plugin, it would just render. I mean, Julia is using Matjax for rendering, right? And they are on Metodoc.
The trouble is that if the markdown parser doesn't know about the dollar signs, then it will try to do markdown on the things within the dollar signs, which then messes up your.
Sure. I haven't looked at how much you can configure Metodoc to use your own builder, but in the Sphinx one you can customize your builder and everything. So I guess for the make docs, I think the package is called. You should probably be able to do that too.
Wow. Oh, I mean, I'm just looking here a little. Oh, look at that. Okay.
What?
And so Gitbook already has integration with. You could download at PDF, EPUB, Mobi. Wow.
Yes. And the full stack is available on NPM, so you can tweak it, you can install it locally. I haven't tried. It's still pretty painful to set up, because basically when you start, it does not use GitHub, and when you want it to work with GitHub, you have a drawback, which is that you still have the live editing, but the push that Gitbook does on GitHub does not trigger a build. So you need to do a dummy commit on GitHub to trigger the build.
And when you so with Gitbook, multiple people can edit it online.
Different page, yes. Same page at the same time. At the moment where you want to press save, it will probably, I don't know.
That's fine. I think that's not.
But you get live rendering on the side, and yeah.
And so if I wanted to be a collaborator on your Jupyter, how do I do that?
Either you send a pull request on GitHub, or let me see. I need to enter an email. I don't know if it works directly with GitHub. Let me try just with your GitHub username.
Now, I downloaded the PDF and I see there's actually content, but on the URL that you provided.
Yes.
You have to click on the read link. It's funny, the table of contents is a dead table of contents. It doesn't actually take you anywhere.
Yeah, basically because I tried to migrate the repo on GitHub and something are wrong now.
No, that's okay, but if you click on the read button, you do get an actually readable page.
Try to... Yeah. What's your email, Brian? It's abg@gmail.com. Let's try that. Yeah, Brian should have received an invite.
I just got it.
He probably ask you to log in with GitHub.
Yeah. No, okay, I see.
So yeah, a collaborator will directly, when you press save, commit on the repository. And you can also, of course, because it's Git, you can just git clone, and if you have access to the GitHub repo, you git push or you make a pull requests, and it works.
And so, one question is, there's so many different aspects of this. In terms of API docs, I imagine that we're going to use TypeDoc for TypeScript stuff.
Yep.
I mean, is the only game in town for Python API docs Sphinx?
I think so.
I mean, event type doc is super painful if you want to set up on Travis.
If you want to set up what?
If you want to auto build the doc on Travis, it's a real pain somewhere in the lower back. Because you need to make a lot of GitHub API requests, and you'll get rate limited on Travis unless you give a token. And if you give a token, it will never be decrypted on pull requests, and you get all this problem with TypeScript when you build the doc automatically, unless you do it locally on your machine. But setting it up on GitHub is really annoying. Like even the test of TypeScript checking on Travis that it compiles, you can only have the tests that pass when it's merged on master, because otherwise it would mean that everybody that sends you a PR get your token decrypted and can do any action on your behalf on GitHub.
Yeah. I mean, we may have to have some custom build infrastructure that's not Travis based for some of this.
Or it would be really nice to have GitHub to have organization and for a token for one repo and one organization, and not a global root token for a person.
Yeah.
Because right now someone has to give Travis their full permission on all their repo. Unless we create a dummy user which only have access to one repository and use this user. But anyway.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, I think
there is, so the Markdown support in Read the Docs is via a tool called Make Docs, MK Docs. And I hadn't heard of it. I'm just reading about it right now. I'm putting the link there.
So I will continue on Gitbook for now. One of the big disadvantage I find is
the big advantage or disadvantage?
Disadvantage, sorry, for Gitbook is that you don't get an automatic table of content. You have to, because it's Markdown, you have to create all the links by yourself.
Okay. That's a pain in the ass.
It means that when you rename something or move something, you have to check all the links.
Uh-huh.
I mean, one thing that I think we want to balance it is the short term versus the long term. In the long term, I think we'll have funding to build whatever integration layers we want. I mean, you know, and so I think we could undertake significant custom development with the eye of solving questions around notebook-based documentation for not just ourselves, but a lot of projects. But that's sort of different than the immediate what tools do we want to use for 4.0 that are moving us in a bit of the right direction, but don't require us to build tons of
stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, a Gitbook is definitely nice if you want someone who is not technical and doesn't know Git at all to work.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty impressed by Gitbook actually.
It's pretty fast if you want to write something quickly and don't want to bother making a pull request, or just easy throw down example and everything. It's really nice. Like Travis, if the build failed because you have an error, it will send you an email. But for now, I'm still not convinced with Gitbook. I think that right now, now that Read the Doc works with most of our repos, still keeping docs in the docs directory and editing and making pull requests is easier. And we can create a custom builder that can pick notebooks. That's how I would do it. Only drawback I see again is that you don't get, and I don't think you get a failing build email when readdoc does not build your docs anymore. And you don't get API to talk to readdoc, so it's still going through the UI and clicking things and trying again. It's a bit annoying, but it's fine.
So Matthias, I can't, the invitation to work on this project on Gitbook eventually failed because I can't edit your repo on GitHub.
Oh, okay, sure.
So you'll have to add me as a collaborator on that. But yeah.
So one of the things that I want to make sure is that we don't end up choosing a tool only because it appears a little easier to use right now if it's missing a lot of functionality. For example, the indexing. Let's make sure that we think carefully about what are in a complex set of documentation, things like cross-referencing and indexing and referring into specific pieces by not having to put absolute URLs into everything, right? If we end up having to put absolute URLs into every time we want to make a link, that basically makes the documentation completely brittle.
I mean, are you okay with relative URLs?
I would much rather prefer semantic labels. Let's be honest here, right? Relative URLs are also very brittle because you move. If you ever move anything, it breaks.
Yeah. So
So I think for complex documentation in the long run, the answer is no. I don't think relative URLs are acceptable.
And so does that pretty much rule out Markdown?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's why I want us to think really carefully about this, right? Because I don't like the restructured text syntax. Okay, I'm not defending it. I think they make a couple of really poor choices in that syntax, but it does have semantics that Markdown by default out of the box doesn't have, and once you start building complex docs, if you don't have the right tooling, you end up doing. It's like you're gonna write the entire Linux kernel by hand in assembly, right? I mean, you need ways of reasoning about complex documents that are more than track by hand every last element in your.
There is one way. It's to use Markdown links, but to have a custom protocol instead of HTTP or something, you use something specific that you can scroll the HTML after and do semantics on that and replace.
Well, Markdown does support reference links.
Okay.
But the only issue about those reference links is that by default, the reference links are resolved only within a document. So we would have to add an additional layer that collects the reference links from all the documents and.
Meaning by document you mean they're only per file?
Yes, exactly. I mean that's all Markdown knows about. But you could have at least the built-in Markdown syntax supports semantic referencing, not resolution.
Mm-hmm. So that's effectively, I mean, restructured text also only supports. At the document syntax level, it's kind of the same thing. Sphinx is the one that, when it does the complete build, understands the combined structure of all your documents, right? It understands the combined indexing structure and whatnot. I mean, basically, what I want to make sure is that we are not setting ourselves up to having to rewrite Sphinx ourselves, just because we don't like. I don't particularly like the restructured text syntax, but ugly link. Going from backticks and angle brackets to square brackets and parentheses, I don't think is enough justification to have to rewrite all of Sphinx ourselves.
Well, I mean, I agree.
Searching and it. I mean, there are discussions on the Common Mark thing about extension syntaxes for Markdown, which I mean is what you would need in order to do something like Sphinx on top of Markdown, and it doesn't at a glance look like that has been settled and standardized yet.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't disagree with that. The other part of that is, if we ever want to use notebooks for documentation,
yeah,
either we have to live with Markdown or we have to rewrite the notebook itself to be REST-based.
Or limit. I mean, the alternative is kind of what we've been doing so far, which is sort of that we limit the notebooks. If you think about kind of roughly as a tree, sort of to the leaves of the tree, in the sense that the notebooks are kind of at the endpoints, and so they're sort of self-contained.
Even our current notebooks have a number of links within the leaves area of the trees.
Yes, but only within themselves. They don't easily hop into things like API calls and other indices and whatnot.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So that's kind of what I'm struggling with, right? What I'm struggling with is, we need to be rational in this decision, in the sense of not letting our hatred of backticks completely drive the decision. So we probably should make a little list of, okay, what are actually the requirements that we want? What are the various criteria that we want to satisfy? Do we want API docs? Do we want our narrative documentation to be able to refer to our API docs? How is that going to work? We obviously do want notebooks as documentation. That's a given. The question, I think, is, do we want all of our documentation to be in notebooks? And if so, what would the price to pay? What would be the price to pay? Or do we, as we have said in the past, an option is to drop notebooks inside of a Sphinx build and let Sphinx handle kind of the outside layer with indices and cross-document searching and whatnot, and let that work for a while, because that would give us the ability to use Markdown in notebooks for many, many, many pages, while still being able to write restructured text by hand, because notebooks can be exported to restructured text, right? And there are people who have already written tools for that, and there are projects that are already doing it. So I think by now we don't even have to do a lot of that ourselves. But I haven't yet seen a tool that can do what Sphinx does on the outside. On the inside, sure, there's probably better things. But for example, Gitbook, as much as it looks very nice, kind of in terms of its web UI, doesn't look like it has anywhere near the level of tooling that Sphinx provides just out of the box. And so I know, Brian, you're not particularly fond of Sphinx, but let's make sure that you're not kind of pushing simply out of dislike for a tool here.
Yeah. And I think my concern there is that if we're still going to have to write a huge amount of custom code to get Sphinx to work with notebooks and understand links between notebooks that are written in Markdown. And at the end of the day, the documents that people are looking at are still not notebooks. Like it's going to go through some complicated processing. But when things get installed on someone's computer, and I think this is part of my vision, is that I want to move towards a direction where people don't reference docs online. They reference them in their local installs where the packages are installed. We just ship notebooks. They can open them up. They're live notebooks. If there's code, they can run them in any language. I think the target of web-based documentation, like I actually want to move away from that altogether, because you can never have live code there, and I still think,
well, with try.jupyter we can.
Yeah.
I mean, SymPy already does some kind of live code thing, I think, based on Google App Engine and their web-based docs. It's far from impossible.
But
the other thing is, I actually don't think that we ever want to say we don't want to have docs online.
Oh no,
having a version of the docs that's hosted online is simply too useful to not do.
No, of course. And part of it is that I want us to make a decision that will force us to make notebooks first-class documentation. And I think if we go the Sphinx on the outside, we're going to push all that improvement of notebooks as first-class documents away from the notebooks themselves. And yeah, I'm.
Well, but we need to be realistic about how much. When you say lots of custom code to integrate notebooks into Sphinx, right now, I actually don't see it. I mean, I don't think it's that much. What I do see on the other side is
people have already done most of it.
Yeah, most of that's already done, Brian. And what I do see is that re-implementing all of Sphinx, that is a monster project, like truly monstrous.
But I guess.
So Matthew Brett has just sent us an email saying that he has been, as he puts it, pounding relentlessly on the notebook and Sphinx for about 10 weeks now, and he thinks he knows how to summarize his experiences. Would we like a 15-minute presentation on that sometime?
Who's that?
Matthew Brett.
Matthew Brett.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, that'd be very useful to hear, yeah.
And I guess part of it is that I have not found the quote extra features of Sphinx to outweigh the pleasure of writing docs in notebooks. Like I feel like the example notebooks that we have, even with the relative links they have to other notebooks, are still way more enjoyable to author and to write, and so I'm just not. I mean, I think the API docs is a unique thing, and I definitely don't know what to do about that. But for writing narrative documentation, I just don't see why. I don't see that Sphinx has that many more benefits over notebooks.
When you write it the first time, possibly not. When you're maintaining it for several years afterwards, and things move around, that's when the benefits really come in.
But again, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, like when you move. When you restructure a bunch of semantically tagged blocks of text, which is really what Sphinx uses, all of that restructuring continues to operate without any manual labor.
Yeah, and one of the consequences of links working in Sphinx, is that our Sphinx docs have orders of magnitude more links than our notebook docs.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
that is absolutely. Yep.
And it's not because links aren't valuable, it's because
they're
links
harder to
aren't maintainable, and we can't reasonably have that much linking in notebooks.
Yeah. I don't know. I really.
I mean, Brian, I know you don't like it. I know you don't like authoring in Sphinx, but we can't just let your personal dislike of authoring with one tool completely drive kind of the entire decision over every other technical consideration, right? We really need to be careful.
Well, and I guess part of my difficulty with that is that if we embrace any notebook documentation and any Sphinx documentation for narrative, again, I think API is a whole separate question, and I don't know what to do about that.
Actually, it's easy to say API is a whole separate question, but you often want your narrative docs to be able to link into
the API.
docs.
Yeah, that's part of what's
utility in having them.
I mean, I think. I mean, I think what honestly, what it sounds like is that it needs to be pure Sphinx then. Because basically you're saying that anything that's a notebook is going to be detached from this integrated web of things that Sphinx offers. And I mean, I just think that's the wrong direction. And part of it is I don't know well, I mean, maybe I'll ask, how would we decide what is a notebook and what is Sphinx? That's maybe the question that I think there's no good answer to.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think we have a really tricky problem, because one way to make that decision is to sort of think of them as leaf document, in the sense that they don't need to link to too much. But then, as Min was pointing out, part of that is because linking to other things from notebooks is a pain in the neck. Those tend to be link poor documents, right? They tend to kind of basically be more or less self-contained little narratives. They don't really integrate with the rest. And what I have been thinking all along, I actually would like to see us get to a future where notebook-based documentation has all the capabilities of something like Sphinx. But I don't want to get into that head first. I do think that's too much. So I do think. Go ahead.
Maybe we should be building not replacements for Sphinx, but ways to better. I mean, obviously there are people who have built tools to integrate notebooks into Sphinx.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should be looking at building or supporting tools that can, you add some metadata to your notebook saying, I'm describing things from these modules, and then that can connect into Sphinx's indices.
Yeah. So here's what I would like. What I'm imagining, kind of a path forward here, is, for now, we do continue to use a Sphinx shell, let's say, like a Sphinx skeleton on the outside. Individual pages can, at any point in the hierarchy, right? At any point in the hierarchy, entire directories or parts of directories could be made up of notebooks interchangeably. And you could have a directory where you have 3 files that are handwritten Sphinx, and 2 files that are notebooks, and another 3 handwritten Sphinx, and that's fine.
Well, but I think we have to make a clearer decision about what is Sphinx and what is notebooks, because right now we have portions of our documentation that are entirely duplicated between both Sphinx and notebooks.
No. We would try to build an integrated tree, a single tree, because part of it is because we have them in 2 places, right?
But that still does. An integrated tree doesn't answer the question of what determines what a particular document is written in. Is it just what that person feels like? Is it some abstract principle we come up with? Is it?
Well, so of the kind of added Sphinx docs that we have, and then comparing the Sphinx docs that we have and the notebook docs that we have, there's a pretty clear line in between them, and one is that the notebook docs are code to run. Yeah. And the Sphinx docs don't have code.
Well,
yeah,
but
to my mind, you use notebook docs for things that it makes sense to do in a notebook, and I think the reason that we need Sphinx docs is that quite a lot of the APIs for Jupyter Client and things are not things that you would really be using in a notebook.
No, and absolutely, but again, I guess I don't. I mean, another example is NB Grader, which is definitely not. I mean, it's a command line tool and a library. It's not something you'd ever run in the notebook, and yet we're documenting it with notebooks currently, and I don't know. It's not.
So here's a first attempt at how to make that decision. I prefer to author notebooks than to author Sphinx. So we certainly want to try to push what would it take to make authoring notebooks as documentation better. And ideas like what Thomas suggested, for example, of saying, can we come up with tools that help if we know that notebooks are being written in the special case where they're not just standalone files, but they're embedded in a bigger set of documents. How can we make it so that when they get exported to static HTML, those notebooks integrate cleanly with Sphinx, and even when you view them as notebooks, maybe those links resolve via an extension. When you're reading that set of notebooks, they resolve via an extension, and they know how to recognize certain classes of links, right? So what I would suggest is we actually try to write everything we can as notebooks. We actually do make an effort of writing, but what that gives us is it gives us a safety valve where if there's a certain if there are parts of the documentation that are becoming poor because the notebook isn't quite ready yet. What I don't want to do is basically end up saying we're going to have really bad documentation for a very long time potentially because we're using a tool that really isn't there at all, right? I mean, we need to strike a balance between a tool, between pushing the tool in the right direction and not using it for something that it literally cannot do, right? I mean, we can't completely sort of not provide good documentation because the tool can't actually do it and say we're going to ignore a tool that actually does the job and can do it well just because we don't like its syntax or its workflow. And so my question is, if we have a skeleton in Sphinx, and we try to write basically as many pages as we can as notebooks, but when a page, it's proving to be a bad choice, that page is written as restructured text. And as we go, we flag, okay, what is forcing us to write pages as restructured text? What is missing from the infrastructure? We flag those, and those become our sort of to-do items. Effectively, that tells us this is how we build. Basically, the MVP is to bootstrap on top of Sphinx, right? If the goal is we would like to have a better capabilities for writing documentations with notebooks, we still have to start somewhere. And what I'm saying is our bootstrapping is Sphinx. Maybe one day we can shed the bootstrap layer, but I don't think we can operate without that bootstrap layer right now. I just don't, I don't see it. Brian, correct me if you see a way of doing it without it that really will give us, that won't just leave us with really missing stuff. I mean,
so
navigation sidebars, integrated search, real cross-linking, APIs. There's a lot of stuff that a complex set of docs.
So what? Hold on. Let me just do this. So I'm just capabilities. So your cross-links, surely one of them.
Cross-links, labeled sort of, I don't know how to call them, labeled links or semantic linking or...
yeah, cross-links.
What semantic labels? Integrated, I would say tables of automatic tables of contents and navigation support.
Index.
Search.
Search.
What else? What else do we have?
What else in terms of pain points for notebooks?
Yeah, or things that in documentation are sort of things you really want to have that are things like what IPython, like what Sphinx provides, and
API doc.
API.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, I think we're never gonna use anything but Sphinx for API docs.
So
But I think if the notebook documentation tooling got good enough, if like a couple of two.
Man, louder.
yeah, we can't hear you, man.
Man,
Sorry,
closer
my
or louder.
computer is doing the jet engine thing.
You must be on Google Hangouts.
Yeah. I don't think we're ever getting away from Sphinx for API docs. I just don't think that'll ever make sense.
Uh-huh.
But if, in theory, we get notebook tooling outside Sphinx to a point that does make sense, I think we could reasonably have the API docs confined to Sphinx as like this is our little API doc blob. Like,
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that will ever happen.
I mean, if we reach that point, I mean, like API docs is not what Sphinx is really designed for.
Best for us, yeah.
So
It's
there
just
may
the
be
only tool for the
better
job.
options.
So to us, I'm kind of just walking through the. I'm sort of walking through the various our docs or other Sphinx docs in general. I'm kind of just looking at them and trying to imagine what is it that it provides, and I think those are.
I think, yeah, I agree with Min that it's difficult to imagine API docs that are not Sphinx based, and so I think we absolutely will need integration between Sphinx and notebooks. I think it's not clear where and how we would draw the boundaries. For example, saying that notebooks are for things that involve running code and Sphinx is for narrative documentation. Like a lot of our notebook docs are just narrative, have no code at all, and so that boundary does not feel very clear and clean to me.
I'm not sure that's. I think the only notebook docs that we have that don't have code are this is how to make markdown cells.
No, I mean here. Let me viewer.
Unless are you talking about something that's not on something other than what we have on IPython?
No, I mean here's an example. I'll paste it into the hackpad of a notebook documentation that has no code, and
Okay, yeah,
here's
there are one or two kind of like
here's another one.
basic things.
And configuring. Well, the configuring one does have code, but there's a lot.
Personally, I don't understand why these are written as notebook. I don't see what's the advantage of writing these documents as notebook, whereas you could write it as Markdown or Sphinx.
Well, because what we found is that this content often we want to use it in a notebook-based tutorial.
So you're writing a notebook not because you want to write it as a notebook. You're writing a notebook just for that, so that they are next to others notebooks, right?
I mean, it's all. I mean, part of like when I teach about the notebook, I want to tell people like the notebook is the thing you use for writing code and database narratives. Now, you may not have code in every single notebook, but it's all there and it's all one, and it's.
I think part of that points to one of the pain points is that linking from notebooks to things that aren't notebooks is between hard and impossible.
And I think this is the other part of the dual Sphinx notebook universe is that it doesn't solve that problem. Like it's still notebooks linking between Sphinx docs and notebooks are still going to be very.
You need the Sphinx docs to exist somewhere.
They're going to need
to. When you're running the live notebook.
Exactly, they're going to need to be somewhere. the syntax, I mean, is still going to be the painful Markdown syntax. And I mean, I'm willing to admit that some level of integration with Sphinx is going to be reality for at least a long time.
Yeah.
But I think the boundaries between the Sphinx things and notebook things are not clear enough to me that I'm
Actually, looking at these notebooks, what would make editing in notebooks for docs much more appealing is if we did something nicer with images. At the moment, even if you're in a notebook, you still have to do the same thing that you do in a markdown file or a restructured text file of saving the image in a separate file and then going and finding the file name and referencing that in your document.
Yeah. No,
you're imagining something, Thomas, like the little trick that GitHub now does that lets you like literally paste straight in and it does all that magic for you.
Yeah, that kind of thing where just
images
images are useful in docs.
Yeah, kidding.
Yeah, we have everything technically that we would need to build that.
Yeah.
We could do image upload and rewrite and write a link, but I think isn't there one of the NB extensions that does that?
Yeah, someone did something along those lines. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Now GitHub does it via whatchamacallit. GitHub does it by uploading it to it like an S3 bucket or something. We probably would want to embed it in the document itself.
Yeah, we wouldn't need to do random, big, complicated URLs. We could just make them local, because the scope of where images go is.
Or literally just in the notebook itself.
Yeah, the other option would be to embed them.
We should. If anything, we should be working on making it easier for image data to not be in the notebook, not make it easier to add base64 strings to.
Yeah.
Either
Especially in
of those
markdown cells, that would really be a horrible editing experience.
Yeah.
You'd end up putting it in the metadata, I bet, which is not. Yeah, that's not ideal.
Yeah.
So let's never write something that makes it easier to put base64 data in the notebook.
Even though you've been responsible for a few of those.
I don't think so.
I thought you did the one to store arbitrary data in a notebook, but.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, maybe I did that.
It's okay.
But no more.
So what I was suggesting was that we bootstrap off of Sphinx for now, and we actually do try to use notebooks whenever we can, whenever it makes sense. We try to use notebooks for the individual documents, but let's basically, as we go, flag what are the problems, right? What are the issues, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, the best I can say is that we try to really say if this particular part of the docs is going to be poorer because it is a notebook, we write that particular file as restructured text. Now, what I'm imagining is then that we just render the lot. We render the lot into HTML, and every page that was generated as a notebook would have a link at the top or somewhere that basically says open the original. Just like in Sphinx, you have a show source on the right. You would have like an open notebook link for each individual page that is a notebook would have an open as notebook. Now, in the future, we could imagine something like the notebook itself being able to navigate. So the Sage guys have done this. The Sage guys basically have made Sage understand how to navigate their own documentation, which is made in restructured text. They write the Sage docs in REST, and they've made it so that Sage knows how to navigate the build tree, and basically understands the structure of that HTML enough that it can render the pages kind of as if the static HTML as if they were notebooks. It can execute the code cells. Because that's kind of the flip side of the equation, which is to say, could the notebook actually understands Sphinx docs? Could you point? Imagine if we could
I think
point?
Sage are interested in having a Sphinx doc to notebook conversion as part of that system.
Well, and the question is whether you want to do that as Sphinx docs or whether basically it's a matter of saying, imagine if the notebook server could navigate a tree. It's already a web server. Imagine if you could point it, navigate to your HTML Sphinx-built tree, and it would render each and every one of those pages, but it would understand them enough that you could run any code block in it automatically. And it would know, it would render them coherently, and you would still have navigation and tables of contents, but it would know you would get basically the benefits of live code execution for every doc, whether it was written as a notebook or not, meaning that you could point that to the standard Python docs. You could point that to the docs of any project that hasn't converted, because the reality is the vast majority of projects, and probably for a while, are going to still be written as Sphinx, because so far that's what everybody is using, and not everyone is going to convert. So the question is, can we bring the capabilities of our system even closer to users who have existing documentation? Yeah, I can't imagine Python core saying, okay, for Python 3.6, we're going to rewrite all the docs as notebooks. That ain't going to happen. But if the notebook server could navigate the live Python docs, understand them, and for every single code cell let you execute them, just by adding a little bit of a change into the build process of those docs so that they have the right metadata, and so that when you navigate to them, it identifies the code cells in Python docs correctly and says, I'm going to treat this as a notebook code cell instead of as a Sphinx Python interpreter class. Because that's the other direction of integration, right? Which is to say, it's not only about the notebook format, it's about our capabilities for executing code. It's about our architecture for interactive computing on the back of other HTML things. Because HTML is more general than the notebook, right? There's more on the internet. As much as we may have dreams of world domination, there is more to the internet than the notebook.
Yeah, and this is, I think, similar to, just looking for the SymPy docs. This is, every code block in SymPy's Sphinx docs.
Yeah.
There is a little tab above it saying run code block in SymPy live, and you click that, and a side panel pops up, which executes that.
Yeah, that this would be developing the import capabilities of NB-convert, basically.
Yeah.
HTML to notebook imports.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure whether it would be actually, Brian, a full conversion to notebook, like HTML to, or rather simply say, the notebook server can navigate HTML pages, and as long as code cells are tagged with whatever classes that it recognizes, or right, I mean, with a potentially a small amount of additional information. I'm not saying that we should be able to navigate random web page on the internet and treat it as a notebook, but just like because that would be much easier to do. If we could tell
a browser extension.
Yeah, it could be a browser extension. It could be as simple as saying, "Oh, hey, Python core people, can you add this little 50-line extension to your Sphinx build that adds this directive, so that you don't have to change your sources. When you rebuild the next version of your docs, those HTML divs will be tagged with a class that we recognize, and then when we navigate to those pages, we can interpret those cells correctly, because."
It's so beautiful. Docs, HTML page on the internet that can execute code locally on the machine.
What's that? Yeah. And then we will really be sent to the asylum by the security people. I mean, one day our internet driver's license will be revoked eventually for the crazy stuff we do.
No, I think for the live code that it has to be hosted, like either that, the documentation has to be hosted on the server that will run the code, basically.
Yeah. I'm imagining there is that the projects like Python.org, which has enough resources in cloud, they could basically say the server that hosts the live docs has that. But the beauty of that is that you could imagine every single Sphinx doc that you have installed on your system for any project that you have installed with Anaconda or with apt-get or with whatever, right? You could be navigating your local doc builds immediately and using them right away.
So I actually have to run to a department meeting. I would much rather stay here and talk documentation.
Oh, I would much rather stay here and talk documentation than deal with a bizarre financial mess of grants that I have right now that came out of left field and is making my life right now completely miserable. My suggestion would be that maybe for Tuesday's meeting, for the next dev meeting, we actually invite Matthew to give us his little 15-minute intro, and we'll iterate on this.
That would be very helpful. All right.
Have fun at your meeting.
Yep.
See you.
So, yeah.
So how does that sound, guys?